Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's Germination Retail Roundtable webinar. My name is Mark Zinkowitz, and I serve as editor for Germination, and today I'm happy to be your host. Today's theme is doing business in a new world. We'll hear from my apologies, a few little technical hiccups. There we go. We will hear from three experts who will offer insights on how the world of business has changed for all of us and how we can cope moving forward as we deal with the realities of life during a pandemic. First, I'd like to thank our sponsors, 2020 Seed Labs and SeCan, for their support. This webinar is being recorded and will be made available at germination.ca following the event. During the presentations, you'll no doubt have some questions for our speakers. Type these into the chat box at any time, and we'll present them when each of our speakers are finished their presentations. Our first speaker today is Sarah Foster, president of 2020 Seed Labs. Sarah found herself in Chile as the pandemic began to sweep the Western Hemisphere. She's going to tell us her story about getting home and the lessons she's learned in terms of running a business during the pandemic. Sarah, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mark. Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining, and I hope this finds you all safe and well. So you'll see on this first slide, I believe, I'm having a little technical difficulty. Give me 1 second.
Yeah, no problem, Sarah.
Are you showing the slide with coffee?
I am, yes.
Perfect. Okay, we're good. The joys of being living out in the boonies.
I know the feeling.
Okay. All right. Excuse me. So, this photograph was taken in Santiago Airport on February the 19th as I was traveling to Chile. And I don't normally take photographs of my coffee cup, but I just had this uneasy feeling as I was sitting there waiting to take the next leg of my journey on to Concepcion. And one thing I've always liked about Starbucks is no matter where you are in the world, they always have a nice little greeting for you. And there you can see it says, Sarah, have a good day. Well, here I'm sitting, and I mean, I'd come through Toronto Airport, and COVID was very much a part of what we were beginning to see in terms of sweeping different countries, but it hadn't really left China. We were hearing a lot about it, but it was one of those things of it won't happen to us. It's not going to get to us. It was that sort of a feeling, and I thought maybe not so much. With world travel today, it's easy to have viruses spread a lot quicker. So as I say, I had this uneasy feeling, and little did I know that we were going into a global lockdown. And that simple cup of coffee was the last one I had, and that's over 2 months ago. So Mark, if you could move along. So Canada and Chile have had a very close relationship for a number of years. Canada's been growing crops in Chile for quite a number of years, many different crops, obviously taking advantage of the contra season to multiply and produce many crops, and the most important one for us being canola. So essentially, with the contra season, they get an extra growing season. So if you're doing research or breeding, you get an opportunity to get another growing season. 2020's been there for 11 years, so this was our 11th year, and we typically go down for about 3 months, so usually from January to April. And we're primarily there because we're working with hybrid canola, for the multinational companies in Canada as well as in the United States. And so what we're doing is we're analysing hybrid canola to be brought back for spring sales in Canada. So here you've got Joanna looking very excited in front of our new lab and our new site. And so after 11 years, we now have a permanent location at the Kurimapu site in Xi'an. Kurimapu are seed and vegetable seed producers located, as I say, in Xi'an, which is in the central part of Chile, in a region known as Nuble, which means new, and that is region 16. I'm not really going to go into a lot of information about Chile, but when we first went down there back in 2009, we were located in a different area, quite a bit further south in Temuco. So that was where all the hybrid canola production was being taken care of. And slowly over the years, it moved north, and it's now centralized more around the Xi'an area and a little bit north. So we now have our new permanent facility, which is absolutely fantastic, because before we had a pop-up lab and we would have to move, and this way we can leave all our equipment, which is sensitive and doesn't do well being moved. The other thing I want to mention is, as I say, close relationship, close friendship. Eduardo de la Sota is the general manager at Kurimapu, and he's one of the most passionate people when it comes to taking care of his clients, his staff, and above all, his family. And he's always been a superb host. And here you can see we have the Canadian flag right up against the Kurimapu flag and the Chilean flag. If you could move along, Mark. So a little bit about what we do. Very, very important work that we've established ourselves with in Chile. We're essentially analysing seed to Canadian standards to expedite the samples back to Canada. Hybrid canola in Chile, GMO, and GMO is actually not allowed to be grown in Chile. So there are some very, very rigid standards around how it's produced, how we deal with it, and when we leave the country, what we actually do, leaving it behind. We're working alongside SAG. They're the equivalent of our CFIA. And SAG follow ISTA standards as well as we do too. So in order for us to be in Chile working with canola, we're actually following the Canadian standards as well as the international seed testing standards. And some of our clients have special requests in terms of what it is that they want us to do. And oftentimes we're doing 6 times the quantity more than what we would normally do in Canada. So the beauty of us being there is that we're working very, very closely with all the multinationals, often, as in this case with Kurimapu, right by the processing plant. So we're able to jump on problems if there are any very, very quickly. And the next slide shows a pivot in a field that was recently crop inspected at this time. And that's the other part of why we're there. So we're not actually doing an official crop inspection, but we are the eyes before the combine comes along. And we are looking for noxious weeds, particularly prohibited noxious weeds that we absolutely don't want in Canada. So Richard Bruins, who's our lead crop inspector, was down there this year, and he did all of the crop inspection. And as you can see here, it's a field that is very much like Lethbridge. So the growing conditions are very similar to what we have here in southern Alberta. And as I say, we're the eyes before the combine comes along. So we're there within days before the field is harvested, so that if there are any last minute issues, we can take care of them. Joanna comes from our Winnipeg lab, Joanna Stroh. She joined us about 5 years ago, I believe, from Romania. She has a very similar background to me. We've both come from Europe, have a very similar education, and both really enjoy coupling travel with our career. And the fact that we've been able to enjoy that has allowed us to literally go further afield. If you could move on, Mark. This is Kurimapu's cleaning facility. World class, always exceptionally clean. And they go to very great distances to ensure that everything is kept separate and things are done in a very timely, orderly manner. I don't have a picture of Rick Rutherford, but Rick Rutherford, if you know him, he's a well-known seed grower from Grosse Isle, farms out in the Grosse Isle area. And he has gone down for many, many years to Chile, around about the same time as us, and has been responsible for helping with the cleaning equipment, making adjustments, making suggestions for different companies down there to improve their throughput and overall quality. So the canola production down there, along with the agronomists that go down from Canada and the folks like ourselves that have been subcontracted to do this work, and people like Rick, is in good hands. The canola quality is absolutely in good hands. And I think that anyone using seed that's coming from Chile, if they recognize that on the label when they're making that purchase, will know that there's been a lot of hard work gone into that, and should have the confidence knowing that that seed is of top quality, both for purity and germination. So not really too much to say about the container, but it's very gratifying to see that container being filled, seeing those trucks lining up in the car park, in the yard, going to the warehouse, picking everything up, and seeing it go to Concepcion, to the port, and leaving for its 16-day journey back to Canada. As I say, we're there to expedite, and that's literally what we do. We make things move a lot quicker, and we make sure that those seed samples and seed lots are brought back in a timely manner. If you could move along, Mark. So, seeing people gathered together here is something that seems like a very, very distant memory. Looking back, we could sit together and enjoy a meal together, whether it was with our colleagues or friends. And the picture on the left is Richard and Joanna, and every day we would go to Kurimapu's canteen, which holds 200 people. So the idea is that everyone can eat together. Chileans are very, very social, and the main meal of the day at lunchtime is very, very important, and it's an opportunity for everybody to socialize. And so we enjoyed our time there, and it was cut short quite quickly as we started to see the virus coming to Chile. So we started to realize that things were changing. The other picture is our cabin that we live in while we're down there, compliments of Kurimapu. And the folks that you see here, this became quite an event. We always try to get together with our colleagues from Kurimapu. And this is Felipe, who used to work for SAG. He's actually an agronomist with Kurimapu, and he takes care of the prohibited noxious weeds in the fields and any other weeds that are troublesome. Gonzalo, he's the field production manager in the middle, and he works with many crops, but primarily with us. And then Claudio, who's in charge of the equipment. And really, little did we know that this was going to be our last meal together without complications. If you could move on, Mark. So this is two of my favourite photographs. One of them Richard took. But this is on the farm that we're at. We're on a organic blueberry farm not far from work. So we have the luxury of a 10-minute drive and we're at work. And as any sunset at harvest time, these are just as beautiful, if not more beautiful. And I would use these times to speak to Kerry Matheson, our operations manager back in Nisku. And we were starting to realise that, yes, these were unprecedented times and things were escalating very, very quickly at this point. So this is about the 10th or the 11th of March. And while I was down in Chile, I was supposed to go to a conference in Poland, an auditor's course workshop in Poland. That got cancelled because of what was happening in Europe, particularly in Italy. And 2 weeks after that, I was supposed to speak at Advancing Women in Calgary, which also consequently got cancelled. So it became very clear to Kerry and I that we had to navigate our way through running our business. Things were changing literally by the minute. We couldn't keep up. But one of the things that we knew we had to do was that people are our priority, and we had to keep everyone safe. We decided to distance ourselves, split shifts, no more use of the lunchroom. We sent all administration staff, non-lab staff home, and clients weren't allowed to come into the building. And we did all of this before our health minister made such suggestions. And we later found out that we were going to become an essential business. So by working in agriculture, so we were taking the right steps to take care of our people. And social distancing really wasn't in the vocabulary at the time. It's something that probably none of us are really very used to. If you could move along, Mark. So this is funny. This is the morning that everything changed. We usually got up quite early, and the picture on the left is actually a volcano that we can see from the deck where we are living. And so this was taken very, very early in the morning. But interestingly enough, Richard took this picture on the right-hand side. No, it did not happen that day. It had erupted previously. But just as we thought, or I thought, that things were settling down at home in terms of, implementing protocols and things like that, I got a message flash up on my phone in Spanish from a friend there that said, La frontera es cerrada, which essentially means the borders are closing. And this was on March the 17th. And I'd been following news probably just like everybody else, and Trudeau was calling people, the Canadians home, people home, and he too was talking about closing borders. So none of us were actually due home for a couple of weeks, and myself, I had another month to complete, and it became quite evident that there was no way that we were going to complete our time down there. So We went into a frenzy. We let clients know. We spent hours trying to book flights and hotels to get back. And essentially, once we let our clients know that we were leaving and we got our flights booked, this was the Monday. We were planning to leave on the Wednesday. So we had a very busy couple of days packing bags, packing up the lab, and it really became quite a disruptive time for us, as you can imagine. On the day the day before we were leaving, we had an earthquake. So just when you think things can't get any worse, that morning we had an earthquake, and it wasn't serious, but it was one of those that definitely makes you wake up in the morning. If you could advance, Mark, that would be lovely, please. So here we've got Ricardo. This was on the day that we were leaving, and as you can see, already wearing masks. And we were all handed masks that week, and some people elected to wear gloves, and it was pretty evident that sanitation and distancing was becoming important. And if you know the Chileans, they greet you with a kiss and a hug, and it was very, very difficult not to be able to do that. And so we just did elbow bumps, and it was good that we started to do that, because Chile quickly started to see the impact of the virus very shortly after we left. So Ricardo, here wearing his mask and warehouse jacket, is the international shipping manager. So we spent a lot of time with him. And here's two shots, very sad shots, of our lab in mothballs. So we had to pack it up quickly, and you can see the boxes. So as I was saying about GMO, it's essentially quarantine, just like we've been. So when we're growing canola, it has to be taken off the field, disposed of if it's not brought back to Canada, and any samples that we leave behind are usually weighed in and weighed out so that we don't lose any seed, and these boxes are destined to go back to the customers. So if you could move along, Mark. So here we are. This is how travel during the pandemic became. So normally we have 2 flights, maybe 3 flights at the most. Concepcion to Santiago, Santiago to Toronto, and then Toronto to Winnipeg for you, Anna, and Toronto to Edmonton for Richard and I. But the only way we could get out was to go through 5 airports with 52 hours of travel. And that worried me, because I'd seen information where customs were absolutely jammed up, people everywhere. But by the time we started traveling, there was absolutely nobody around, only people going home. I've never seen airport lounges so empty. I've never seen shops shut and restaurants closed. And those that were open had every second table closed off. And just the same when we flew. So here you, Anna, and I, although we're sat next to each other, the middle seat was blocked off. And Richard was the only person, I believe, behind us. So the airlines were doing everything they could to distance us. And as you can imagine, in-flight service was very limited. So when we took off, we flew over the Andes towards Brazil. So we came home via Sao Paulo, and then into Montreal, then into Toronto, and then Toronto to Winnipeg, and Toronto to Edmonton. So a very long trip home, but tried to have some calm thoughts over the Andes, and started to think, well, how bad is this all going to get? What's it going to be like when I get the other end? have any of us contracted the virus during travel, because the three of us had kept very, very isolated and very safe during our time in Chile. So we had no idea. And we had to go into 14 days quarantine. So, Mark, if you can go to the next slide. So here I am at home in Alberta. What else can I say other than what the devil happened? Words have been stronger than that, but first 5 days of quarantine for me, not only are you wondering if you contracted the virus, but when you have a busy lifestyle like myself with travel, and I've just been rudely taken out of a program from Chile that I absolutely love, my life really changed. And this is my daughter with her boyfriend, and this was 14 days after. And I may as well have been in Siberia, because I saw nobody, and coming back into the winter, quite shocking. If you could move on, Mark. So this is the new normal. We've, as I say, taken many precautions to stay safe. We've been deemed an essential business. And here's Kerry Matheson on the left. She's our operations manager. And I have to say that she kept things together, moving smoothly through everything that we decided, and she really has steered the ship. First thing we had to deal with was the fear and the anxiety associated around working together. And once we implemented the safety measures, I think it went a long way with the distancing and the masks and the gloves, and only having 8 people in a 10,000 square foot building at any one time. I think everyone was happy and everyone was comfortable. If you could move to the last slide, Mark. This is Moses and Richard, and Moses is doing germination, and typically there's more than one person in that lab, but now there's usually only 1 or 2. And again, Richard working in the molecular side of things, again, very much on their own. And we've been very fortunate to be able to split everybody and have 1 or 2 people in each department. So we've no entry into the lab. We deal with our customers outside, but we do think that that's definitely the safest thing for us to do, and I believe a lot of businesses are doing that, and I'm sure you're going to hear more about that as we go through today's webinar. So just very quickly, because I know I'm running out of time very quickly. The road ahead and the lessons. Well, we've been told to stay home, to flatten the curve. And I mean, I think we're very fortunate in Canada that we're not overpopulated. And I think for this reason, we haven't seen the huge numbers that other countries have seen. And, you talk to people, and people are saying that they're getting fed up with this, and this is getting old, and staying home and being in lockdown is getting old. But I think we've got to take it seriously, because other countries are still struggling to flatten the curve, and they're still examining how the virus is spreading. I think it is very contagious, but I don't think people really know why or how certain people fall prey to it easier than others, and some are in hospital and some aren't. And I think as many countries stay in lockdown, there's been suggestions that we won't see a normal until there's a vaccine. So I do think that we have to absolutely take things seriously. They're reopening Alberta slowly, and on May the 1st they allowed for golf courses and dog parks to open, and as we go forward, dentists and physio, massage therapists, all the while following public health guidelines very carefully. May the 14th, so after 14 days of incubation, that's typically associated with COVID, they're talking about retail and hair and restaurants with strict guidelines for sanitation, etc. But there's no mention of dates for phase 2 or 3. For those of us that work at home, I was just saying earlier, I think we work harder. I think we've got to be careful about putting boundaries around time. Sitting at the computer for hours on end can be very tedious. And I think it's important to take time out, exercise, walk, take up a hobby, and keep your minds busy. Avoid being overwhelmed by the tide of this rolling news and all the clickbait headlines that we see that can send us into panic. And if you are open for business, let your clients know you're there. And because there's so much uncertainty with them, have big posters and reassure the customers. And we know that we will get through this. There's been many viruses and pandemics in the past, and human beings are extremely resilient, and I think we'll absolutely get through it if we stick together. So with that, that is the end of my presentation.
Excuse me. Thank you so much, Sarah. That was great. If you have a question for Sarah, please just type it into the chat box. Sarah, how were you able to actually manage your business while in quarantine? How did you coordinate that? I mean, being in isolation, that must have been a huge challenge for you. What were some of the top strategies that you learned to do that as efficiently as possible?
A lot of phone calls, monitoring the news, essentially a lot of phone calls, daily phone calls with NISCU, and just strategizing, the what ifs, and it was a very, very, very difficult time. It's always a long hours there anyway, because Canada's 3 hours behind, 4 hours behind, so noon time there would be 8 here, and we would follow along with the Canadian timetable too. But just trying to, make sure you kept in touch. I think biggest thing was communication, Mark.
Once the pandemic is over, Sarah, what long-term impacts or changes do you see this having on how you do business?
Well, I think because we've been deemed an essential business, we've been really, really fortunate not to have to look for government, funding, and we've essentially managed to keep going. It's not been easy. In fact, we've had a very busy spring because we had a very, very slow fall, and it's always the opposite in our business. So had a lot of long hours, and we're actually going 7 days a week with 2 shifts of 4 day 10-hour days. And I think I've noticed that it's silly to say, but I've noticed that we've become more human in all of this. And when we thought perhaps we'd lost the human touch, I think we've got it back. I think we listen more carefully, and I think people really do not take each other for granted in the same way perhaps as they did before. And I think, as I say, because we're essential, we've become more than that. I think we've proved that, and Kerry keeping this together with the team proved that no matter what, we were going to be there because we're a very, very important resource for being able to make sure that if there's something wrong with the seed, or likewise there isn't, our clients know how to deal with what they've got. So we were able to keep offering all the essential services that we can, because we've got several people that are cross-trained in different elements of our business. And going forward, I think better use of time, better use of space. Certain people have handled this better than others, and I'm not saying that about our business, but or about 2020. I've just heard that with other people, and it's, I think, better use of time, better use of space, that kind of thing, and perhaps more efficient.
And what can clients or other people in the seed industry do to make your jobs easier as seed analysts?
The most simple thing is writing the information on the bag. We need lot number, name of product, variety, if there's if it's pedigreed seed, and the types of tests that they want. A lot of times we phone a client looking for that type of information, but they also have the option of pre-entering samples too, and then getting a barcode that they can put on the bag. So that's number one. We never know the history of the seed, but believe it or not, when you run a germination, you can pretty well tell what's happened to that seed just by the characteristics of the seedlings. So, for example, if it's frost or there's been some chemical damage or mechanical damage. So we don't really need information about the history. We can sort of decipher that ourselves. But if there are issues, we end up phoning the clients and talking about it. And it usually comes quite clear that what we've seen is what we have assessed, and the client agrees with it.
Well, thank you so much, Sarah, for your presentation today. That was great. Our next speaker is Teena Sauve. She's founder of Botree, and she's going to speak about challenges workplaces are facing right now and her advice for tackling those challenges head on. Thanks again, Sarah. Stay safe and healthy and have a great day. Teena, the floor is yours. Take it away.
Thank you, Mark, and good afternoon, everyone. So thank you, Sarah. That was very informative. A lot of what I think I will speak to will be complementary to what Sarah was sharing with everyone. And I think one of the things to just sort of shed as a sort of high-level discussion around some of the significant changes that we've seen from Botree is really there's 4 key areas that we have seen significant changes around, and that is as you look at digital solutions, which I'll speak a little bit more about, the effects on the labor force. So many know that our country has been in a labor shortage, and in fact, it has been a significant challenge for us as we even look through to 2030. So we're seeing additional labor effects, which I'll talk about. Obviously, policies and procedures are another key area, and then finally, communication. So I'm just going to touch sort of lightly on each of the specific areas. And of course, if there are any questions, you can type them in the chat, or we can address them at the end. So if you can go to the next slide, please, Mark. So when we think about some of the challenges that we're seeing around digital, obviously with the social distancing, closure of so many different organizations, we are a company that deals with multiple different industries. So we really have seen significant changes throughout multiple industries, but there seems to be some common threads in all of them, and that's why we've chosen to speak mostly about these 4 key areas. So as we think about challenges with digital solutions, a lot of organizations not only were not equipped to go digitally, but also lacked infrastructure and resources to take their organizations digitally. So we are seeing now some infusion of dollars across the country to support organizations. There's lots of city finances to help sort of these small businesses, those micro-sized businesses, to get online digitally through e-commerce. And so we are seeing a lot of what we're doing today, whether it's through GoToMeeting or Zoom, lots of webinars happening. And it definitely adds to the challenge, not only the learning curve the infrastructure, but also just by human connection on how do we create that human connection when we are really in this virtual space. And so there's lots of different ideas around what we can do to create a human connection in these virtual spaces. And some of the ways in which we can do it is to really look at different ways to connect with your employees, whether there are regular huddles, whether there are different types of educational forums that you can create. And then again, thinking about your customers and how you create that connection with your customers in this virtual space. And there are a number of different ideas and successful organizations really making that connection. I know that some of the examples we've seen is we've been working with a company, a bunch of companies in the healthcare space. And I think that along this lines, there's a lot of similarities in healthcare as we see in the ag industry. And, a lot of salespeople where those relationships have been built off human connection. And so now trying to support those salespeople in how to create virtual sales experiences. So again, we probably could talk for a very long time on these different topics, but just as a high level, these are two sort of key areas that you should be concerned about and things that you should be preparing for around the future. So if we can go to the next slide, Mark. So as we think about the concerns that we've already been faced around our labor shortages in Canada, and I know that the ag industry has some concerns as we're looking at not being able to bring in some labor from other countries due to the pandemic. I think one of the areas that is imminently important is that it really should be a major focus of our organizations to look at how do we retain our employees, and for those organizations that have in fact had to lay people off due to closures, is how do you keep engaged with people when you have to lay them off, and then again, what happens when we start to see these slow opens throughout the country on how to re-engage your team. And at the end of my deck here, I'll talk really about the core of all of this being communication. And so for those of you who have been fortunate enough to retain your employees, how do you continue to support them? Sarah talked about different opportunities to ensure that they are feeling safe, connected, healthy, by setting organizations up with the right space. Mental health is a major area that we are seeing some significant challenges right now. And again, tapping into your resources around you, there's lots of free resources online to support mental health. There are various different assessments that can be done, again, on your organization to ensure that you're following some proper guidelines around supporting your employees for mental health. And again, reaching out to local organizations that really focus in on people, both from a cultural standpoint as well as mental health can be another area of major support for you. As you think about re-engaging your employees, we've seen a lot of companies setting up regular touch bases with the employees they've had to lay off. Obviously, people are not mandated to stay connected to their company, but we definitely have seen them create those opportunities. They've done educational forums, again, complimentary to the employee just to keep them connected. So again, there's lots of different resources that are available to you. Can you go to the next slide, please, Mark? So as we start to think through what does the next 12 to 18 months look like for us here in Canada? And again, I think Sarah mentioned it. Not only do we have the concerns of what happens as we start to see these slow opens throughout the country, but we also, there is some chance And of course, I am not a scientist by any means, and know that we're all still looking around the world for countries that have been affected earlier than us, just to look at what are the chances of a second wave happening over the next 12 to 18 months before an immunization or a vaccine is created. But in this time, what we do need to prepare ourselves for as we look at this journey over the next 18 months is, what will those new ESA standards look like? Do we have the right policies and procedures set up for our organizations around even examples of if we get if a child in our family gets sick, does that make all of us have to be quarantined for another 2 weeks? And if so, how do we create the support for our employees, as well as being able to have the right succession plans in place? I do apologize, as I am living proof of having children at home. I do apologize because they have just interjected here.
No problem, Teena.
So sorry. So, some of the things to keep in mind as we are combing through our current employee handbooks, our employee contracts, and our HR policies is to really think through, do we have the right things in place for succession? Sarah mentioned that a lot of her team are cross-trained, which is excellent, something we would always recommend. But also, as I lead into the last slide, is how do we communicate what this new landscape looks like in our workforce? So we can go to the next slide, please, Mark. And as we sort of really try to think through, I think back to March 11th, and I too was stranded in another country. I say stranded, I was very happily stranded where I was. But I think through to even just how we saw communication across the world around this pandemic. And communication is at the core of everything. And I think that as employers of employees, this is probably one of the most important areas that we could invest the time. We know that as humans, we all have different communication styles, but also very different lenses in which we perceive information. And it's imperative that we think through what are those various different communication styles, how do we modify the communication to our employees to ensure that they get a clear, concise message, but also feel the support that is necessary in these unprecedented times, and to reduce, obviously, the amount of stress that we are all under. And also, super important is to ensure that we are communicating in a way that we are maximizing our output of our individual employees as well. As we know, so many people have been relocated to their homes. Some organizations have been able to support ergonomic setups, bringing in lots of equipment into the households. But it really is important that we support our employees in various different ideas around creating schedules where we know that you can increase productivity if you chunk out their time, giving people permission to exercise regularly, having assigned time where we have seen organizations set aside times within the day where it really is around brainstorming ideas, creating innovative ideas, which really encourages and engages and excites employees, especially in these times where it's so difficult for us to get a connection. It allows us, again, as we thought back to the very first discussion point around digital solutions and how do you create that human connection, is when you're really supporting the employees around dedicated work time, dedicated innovation, and out-of-the-box ideas. It allows for us to be motivated and to drive that culture within the organization that sees resiliency in these unprecedented times, allows organizations to pivot and or improve the areas that perhaps they didn't have time to invest in prior. So I know this was a very rushed deck, but I just wanted to cover off on a few key things that we're seeing out there as we're working with different organizations. And I'm open for any questions if you have any. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Teena. Yeah, quick question for you. What's your number one recommended resource that business owners can use to stay up to date when it comes to what's new out there to help them? Like, there's all kinds of government programs and things happening right now. Is there one favorite resource of yours that they can make use of?
I think if organizations are looking for a lot of government support, if that's sort of the area that is a high priority, there's a fabulous organization. It is based in Ontario, but it supports all provinces, and it's a company by the name of MentorWorks. And the reason I have chosen to stay closely connected with that organization is because they really are sort of a compilation of all of the different resources that are available both federally and provincially, and a very good support organization if you had additional questions. So that would be MentorWorks, just like it sounds.
And one more quick one, Teena. Obviously, as you just mentioned, you have little kids at home with you. What's your top tip for working from home with children for all the parents out there?
I think the biggest tip would be, Sarah mentioned it about just seeing people connect and be kind. I think that all of us that are working from home and having to deal with, whether it's children or some of us are taking care of our parents, we all have different situations, is to be kind to ourselves, to remember that we are all human, and that these things will happen, and let them roll off you, because I could give you all the tips and tricks that I have created other than locking them up. There isn't really anything else other than just being kind to yourself, that it's okay that these things happen, and then at the end of the day, it shows that there is a human behind the voice and behind the business.
That's true. Very good advice. Thank you very much, Teena. Stay healthy and safe. You and your children have a great day. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Mark.
Take care. Last but definitely not least, we have Brad Pinkerton of SeCan. Brad has been visiting seed retail operations around Manitoba and has gained some important insights on what's working for them as they do business in the time of social distancing. Brad, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Mark. And thank you for this opportunity to talk about my experience in Manitoba. What I want to do is talk about what I've seen as I travel around Manitoba during this time. I've, of course, only been in Manitoba because if I was to leave Manitoba, I'd have to self-quarantine for a couple of weeks, and don't have time for that. So if you could skip ahead another slide, Mark. I'll talk about my experience in Manitoba, and then skip one more. And so initially, a lot of our seed is shipped out by government employees, and their hands were really held behind their backs this year with restrictions. So we had to improvise, and we had a lot of breeder seed just got shipped out to Central Point, and we picked up that seed and ripped around and delivered that. So early on, I was out dropping off this important breeder seed. And as I was going from retail to retail, or if I'm out shopping, getting groceries, getting pet food, or whatever, it's kind of the same thing. As I enter a business, I need to know what are my obligations? What do you want me to do at your business? And so as I go through, I'm going to kind of take you on a tour. As I go through that, it's kind of all about that. How do you get me the information so that I know what I should do? Go ahead to the next slide. Now, in the early days of COVID-19, when it kind of first started happening and things were getting shut down, some of the retail's got information out to their customers. Okay, here are the rules. They email it out or print it off on 8.5 by 11 pieces of paper, and they might put it on their office door. And so because I'm not a normal customer, as I'm traveling around the province, I wouldn't get the emails. I wouldn't know what the rules are. And so I would pull up to the retail and I would get out because I see there's a sign 20 feet away, and I'd go to the sign and it would say, stay in your vehicle. Well, okay, so that's good information. It just, in the early stages, that's kind of how it worked. So we go ahead, one more slide, Mark. We kind of fumbled and figured things out, how we figured out what our rules were going to be. And the pictures that I'm showing you now going forward are all kind of from the last couple of weeks. So it's kind of more the new normal. And you'll kind of see what people are doing. Let's go ahead again, Mark. So the first stop on our tour will be Pitura Seeds, and they're in Domain, Manitoba. And one more, Mark. And this is what you see when you pull up to Pitura's. You've got a nice big stop sign, so you know right away that, okay, there's some special rules here. I need to pay attention to the sign. And if you click it one more time, it should zoom in, I think, Mark. There we go. So it says stop, COVID-19 protocol in place, report directly to the office, and it tells van trailers where they need to go and grain trailers where they need to go. And so for me, I head to the office. So if you go to the next picture, you can see it's a shot of Pitura's office. Got some chairs there. And if you go ahead one more, it'll zoom in. Keep going, and you can see there'll be some red tape lines on the pathway going up to the door so that people will social isolate, have the space between them. Go one more, Mark. And then there's also two signs up there on the wall. So if we go on, there we go, we can see what they say, and it says, tells you to stay apart and stay by your vehicle, and it has phone numbers for everybody. So really, really, really good information. And then go ahead one more, and we'll see that we walk up to the table. There's the table that will have the scale ticket, bill of lading, whatever else we may need to sign, and hopefully we brought our own pen. One more, Mark. And then, so some of the Pitura's comments, if you go one more, Mark, they said most of their customers have been pretty understanding. At the time when I was visiting with them, they only had one person so far that was kind of suggesting they were going too far and was kind of grumpy with them. Most of their customers were understanding and wanting to abide by the rules, and things were going quite well. Okay, next stop on the tour will be LD Seeds, and LD Seeds is in Altona, so southern part of Manitoba. And go ahead, Mark. And as you come up to their office, they've got a sign on their office door that, my camera makes it look a little bit smaller, but if you go one more slide, you can kind of zoom in, and that, you can read most of this from your truck. It says, please stay in your truck while unloading, loading, and do not enter the office or shop. Okay, so that's good. It gives us a nice, good, clear information if you're coming to the office. And if you're in a grain truck and you're heading straight to the scale, which is what you would normally do, go ahead, Mark, until you get to the scale sign. There's a sign on the scale, and it's in big letters, and I got another picture there that zooms in a little bit more. And it says, due to COVID-19 for employee and customer safety, please remain in your truck at all times. And then it has the staff phone numbers so that you can call the staff. And that's super important because, if it's a customer, they're going to know the staff phone numbers. But if you're a truck driver from a different province and you're coming in, you may not know what everybody's phone numbers are, and if you're supposed to stay in your truck, how do you contact somebody? So super important to have those phone numbers nice and easy to find so you can get more direction if you have more questions. So Mark, if you could advance to the slide that says LD Seeds Comments. So when I was asking Dylan Weeb about his how things were going there and how he was feeling about everything, and he reminded me that his grandparents live right there across the driveway on that farm yard, and they're older and they really need to protect them and keep them healthy and safe. LD Seeds was still using paper scale tickets because they had a number of truckers that were going between provinces and moving around, and that was something that they still had to do. So that's what they were doing. If we move on now to, the one other thing that I must mention about LD Seeds is typically the way things would go there is a farmer would come, in a normal year, a farmer would come, they would go to the bin, get their seed with them, then they would stop by the office afterwards and they would calculate, put on a piece of paper, the 1,000 kernel weight, the germination, what kind of air seed they're using. They go through and make them a prescription of how to be successful with the seed, what they need to do when they get back home. And so what Dylan is doing this year is he's figuring out ahead of time, okay, this customer's getting this lot number, and he's creating this seeding prescription for them ahead of time. He will email it to the customer before the customer even comes to pick up the seed, so that there's really no reason for that customer to come to the office. They go get their seed, they've already got all the information they need, and away they go home. Most of the retailers I visited, they said, there's always somebody that doesn't keep their distance, and I admit when I was there, I noticed a guy come ripping up to the office in the truck, and he went right into the office. So most people are respecting these desires, but not quite everyone. So our third stop is going to be Riddell Seed Company, and they are at Warren, Manitoba, and Craig Riddell is the owner there, so you can move ahead. And Craig has a nice sign that says, all visitors remain in vehicle. For assistance, please call or text. So he's got his phone number there. Everything's perfect. That's great. But so I was asking Craig how he's figured things out, if he's made any changes. He said, well, this sign that I have up, when I first did it, I put it at the end of my driveway. Let's go ahead to the next slide, Mark. And when I had it on the end of the driveway, or at the end of his lane, his customers would drive up Road 3W there, and then they would stop their semi or grain truck right there on the road, and then they'd read the sign, and they'd phone him. And he thought, well, that's kind of, there's a fair bit of traffic there, so that wasn't ideal. So then, if you go to the next slide, Mark, he moved that sign halfway down his lane, so that now the customers would come right into his lane, come halfway down, see the sign, stop. Oh, okay, and then they would phone Craig from there, and at least they're off the main road, and that worked quite well, he said. So he was pretty pleased with that. We can go one more. So, comments from Craig. He said he's pretty much totally switched to electronic paperwork this spring now, unless a customer comes up absolutely requires paper. So there's some people that were going to a different province, or some truckers that were going a long distance that really wanted to have a piece of paper, then that was fine. But he pretty well tells everybody that you're going to take some electronic scale ticket, and all the information will be there that you need. And most of his customers were preferring that. They have everything then electronically. They know where it is. It's not a piece of paper that ends up in the bottom of the truck and gets lost or gets put in the shop, and then it doesn't make it to the house. So he said the feedback on that was actually was really good. Our next stop is Ellis Seeds. They're in Wawanesa, Manitoba. And this was just last Thursday, I think I stopped at their place, and they had a nice big sign when you pull up to the office that says, COVID procedure, stay at truck and wait for assistance. So perfect. I know right away what to do. I pulled up to the office, and sure enough, Kelly was out of the office and came and talked to me right away at my window to tell me where to go. And once I said why I was there, and that was really good. Having a conversation with them that day, they said the response has been really good from their customers. they really only had one grumpy person so far that had complained about having to stay in their truck. Otherwise, most people were great. They of course let their truck drivers get out of the truck because they need to help sweep out the truck and do whatever. But one of the common themes is, stay within 5 feet of your truck. You can get out, walk around, stretch your legs, help get things going, but stay close to your truck. Don't be wandering off. Don't go into the office. Don't go into the shop. We'll come to you. So that seems to be a pretty common theme. If you go to the next slide, they are still using signed paper copies because they do prefer to have that signature on that scale ticket to when they go to do billing to make sure everything was received. Email copies are also being sent to the customers. And Simon Ellis had commented that one of the really cool things he was seeing was, so he was receiving some seed. So there's a truck coming from a different wholesaler, and before the truck even showed up, he had an electronic copy of the bill of lading, of germination, of all the information, exactly how much seed was coming. He had that before the truck driver even showed up, so he could figure out exactly where he was going to put it or what he was going to do with it. And he really thought that was fantastic, and that was a really nice perk coming out of this. Let's go to the next slide. So some of my kind of comments, earlier in the season, as I was talking, at mid-May, as this was just getting going, as I'd often talk to some of my seed growers and retailers as I was driving around delivering seed, they were quite concerned about, if they were to fall sick, how would they load their customers? How would they get all this seed out to their customers? And so it became very apparent that they were critical in this step, and they really had to maintain their health to make sure that they could do their job to get the seed in the ground. There's a lot of thought and discussion put into how they were going to stay safe, and how they could really prioritize things to get it out the door if things were going to get a lot worse. So it was really good discussions. Next slide. What is missing this year? The biggest thing that the retailers I talk to are missing is that opportunity for a good visit. Customer loading can often be that only face-to-face interaction that my seed growers get with their customer, and now that wasn't always happening. Some customers would still get out, and they would kind of move to the end of the truck where it was quieter, where the auger wasn't there, keep their 6 feet apart, and have that conversation about the business and the farm and special needs this year and what they can do to help. But other customers were less desired less to get out of the truck, and they wanted to stay inside and stay safe. So that's unfortunate that we lose that face-to-face interaction. Extra service it's hard to get that extra service now. So I have some retails, some seed growers that their customers would leave their trucks there at the end of the day, and they would load it up with treated seed and deliver it back to their farm first thing in the morning. And of course, you have to be able to decontaminate everything, and so you have to have your sanitization equipment and all that. And so that made things trickier, and so I think there'll be a lot less extra services done because it's just too hard to do in this year. So my wrap up, big signs showing obligations are great. Most retailers are asking you to stay within 5 feet of your truck. Electronic scale tickets and documentation seem to be the way of the future, and the things that will really help keep people safe. Look for opportunities where you can still stand back from the auger, still keep your 6 feet isolation, and have that 6 foot conversation about your business and what you can do to help your customers, and still understand your customers and the things that they're doing and the things that they need. So that's kind of my tour through some retails in Manitoba, and I would open up to any questions if you have any.
Thank you so much, Brad. Yeah, a couple questions before we wrap up for today. What's the top change you see the pandemic having on the world of seed retail after this is all over?
Well, certainly the biggest change is customers are not coming into your office because you're not making that a public place anymore. So you're missing out on those interactions, and we're going electronic. So you're getting that electronic scale ticket and invoice, and so we're really missing out on that face time. And for some of these retails, that's a critical opportunity for interaction. So that's a big change for sure.
And we always, or at least I always try to look for silver linings during times like this. And is there one potential benefit you see coming out of all this in terms of the retail landscape once all the dust has settled?
Well, the electronic copies are certainly very efficient, and we get a lot more information in that, and we're not going to lose documentation. So I think this digitization will certainly help keep people efficient and allow more time for doing other things and less dependency on paper. So I think that's going to be really good.
Thank you so much, Brad, and thank you to all our speakers today. And I'd like to thank our sponsors one more time before we wrap up, 2020 Seed Labs and SeCan. Thank you so much for your support. And I'd like to thank you, our audience, for spending your lunch hour with us today. This webinar will be available at germination.ca within the next 48 hours. And actually, I have one more question quick before we wrap up that just came in, Brad. What are retailers doing with seed treatment documentation during this time?
Well, wherever they cannot do electronic, then they are handing them papers. Most often they're not requiring a signature. They're just handing them the piece of paper into the truck and say, here you go, here's your info. But wherever possible, they're taking pictures of anything and sending that on with the seed grower, with the farmer.
Thanks, Brad. And if you have any other questions for Brad, I have his email up on the screen right now, bpinkerton@secan.com. Again, thank you so much for joining us today. This webinar will be available to view and to download on our website, germination.ca, very, very soon. Have a great day, everyone. Stay safe and stay healthy. This is Mark Zinkowitz of Germination signing off.